When you look at the history of ancient Eurasia, there is a typical pattern that would repeat itself throughout the ages in this region. And this pattern would go on to affect every culture that flourishes and dominates here. And this was true in the case of the Scythians as well. The Scythians would follow this pattern, from their migration to their final decline. And this is how this pattern goes. The nomads from Central Asia would migrate westward toward the Pontic steppe, mostly as a result of political conflicts taking place in Central Asia. These people would then settle themselves in the Black Sea region, displacing the former dominant people from their place, followed by their prosperity, and then their eventual decline. Although there may have been different causes at different times as well for the decline of the cultures, but migration from the east has always been a major factor leading up to this. And for the Scythians, it was the Sarmatians. According to pseudo-Hippocrates, towards the end of the 5th century or the beginning of the 4th century, Sarmatians, who were culturally similar to the Scythians and resided in the Volga River region, moved westwards across the Don into the Scythian territory. And although the incursion has already begun, it was not the beginning of their decline. In fact, it was the 4th century BC, when the Scythians saw the most prosperity, and it was after the Sarmatians had begun to arrive. But as a result of the incursion, the Scythian elites probably began to move westward, and then established themselves in the Dobruja, south of the lower Danube. Things began to get bad when the Scythians suffered a series of defeats, first under the leadership of King Aetius, by Philip II of Macedonia in 339 BC, and then in 313 BC by Lysimachus, a latter Macedonian king, and then again in 309 BC, during the civil war of Bosporan Kingdom. Things got worse when the migration of the Sarmatians intensified in the 2nd century BC. The historian Diodorus, writing in the 1st century BC, says that the Sarmatians, having become much stronger, plundered large parts of Scythia, and turned much of the country into a desert, by exterminating the Scythian population. The Celts and the Thracians swept in from the west, and hence the Scythians were pressed from both sides. And it was from this period that the Scythian kingdom in the lands between the Danube and the Don ceased to exist, and the Scythian culture suddenly disappeared from the Pontic steppe. The Sarmatians took over the Pontic steppe east of the Dnieper, leaving only the Crimean peninsula and the coastal region around the estuaries of the Dnieper and Bug as refuges for the remnant Scythian population. The Sarmatians would then continue here till the 4th century AD. And as the pattern goes, they too would be replaced by another wave of migration from the east. The next group who would replace the Sarmatians and dominate here would be the Huns. And so the pattern would continue to repeat itself here for many centuries to come. As for the Scythians, they underwent a huge sedentarization after their decline in the Pontic steppe, and a whole network of small, well-fortified towns and settlements began to appear in their later region. Scythians now became primarily an agricultural people, although the kings and aristocracy continued as before to lead a nomadic life. In the last 2nd century BC, and in the 1st century AD, as described by Strabo, 2 little Scythias arose. One situated in a region of Dobruja, probably founded by the Scythians, who remained on the right bank of the Danube after the death of Aetius. The Scythians in this region were always in a minority amongst the Ghetto-Thracian tribes of this area, but the Scythian kings ruled over them, creating an independent state, which existed from the end of 3rd to the beginning of the 1st century BC. The second Little Scythia comprised the foothills and steppes of the Crimea, as far as Taurida, and the lower Dnieper and the lower Bug on the north. And its capital was transferred to the Salju Valley, and called Scythian Neapolis as well as Kermanshik. It was here that the Scythian royal headquarters, the focus of the Scythian aristocracy, were situated. The late Scythian culture of this Crimean Scythian kingdom was not a continuation of the Scythian culture of the 4th century BC, and the kingdom itself was significantly Hellenized, and more closely resembled the Hellenistic kingdoms, ruled by barbarian dynasties, than to the previous nomadic kingdom of the 4th century BC Scythians. The 2nd century BC was the time of the greatest flourishing of the late Scythian kingdom centered in Crimea. The Scythian kings, wanting to get rid of the mediator in their trade, conducted a series of successful offensives against the Greek towns, which had so far been controlled by the city of Chersonesus. Under the leadership of Pseularus, the Chersonese lost some of its lands, and towards the middle of the 2nd century BC, all the northwest Crimea was in Scythian hands. Chersonese settlements were destroyed and Scythian fortresses began to be built on the sites of some of them. Albia became subject to the Scythian king, and Pseularus struck his own coins in this Greek city. At the same time, close ties were established between Scythian Neapolis and Albia. The Crimean Scythian kingdom also acquired a fleet of its own under Pseularus, due to which the Scythian traders were able to independently transport their agricultural products to Mediterranean markets. Although Pseularus continued Scythian hostility against Chersonesus, he maintained good ties with the Bosporan kingdom, with a daughter of his marrying a member of its royal dynasty. At the end of the 2nd century BC, the Chersonese turned to the king of Pontus Mithridates VI Eupator for assistance. Scythians under the leadership of Palicus, Pseularus' successor, were defeated by the Pontic king's army led by Diophantus, but only after 3 expeditions had been led against them. Thus Chersonese was spared overwhelming defeat. However, it was never able to recover all its lands. In the 1st century AD, the Scythians once again became restless, and increased their harassment of the Chersonese, and frequently waged war on the Bosporan kingdom. The expedition of the Roman general Platinus Silvanus against the Scythians in 63 AD liberated the Chersonese from the Scythian siege. The Crimean Scythian kingdom nevertheless continued to exist even after its defeat, and after Mithridates' own defeat by the Roman Republic, the Crimean Scythians were able to regain some of their strength during the 1st century AD and besieged Chersonesus. In 64 AD, the Roman legate of Mysia, Tiberius Plautius Silvanus Aelianus, campaigned against the Scythians, defeated them, and installed Roman garrisons in Crimea, including in Chersonesus. By 50 to 150 AD, the Scythians had mixed in with Tauri and the Sarmatians. The Scythians would then continue being here until the 3rd century AD, after which the Scythian settlements in the Crimea and lower Dnieper ceased to exist, as a result of the invasion of the Goths and the Germanic tribes. During the period of the Great Migration of different people, the Scythians finally dissolved into a multitude of tribes, and lost their ethnic distinction. And so this was the end of the Scythians. I hope you've enjoyed the video. If you like this video, please don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe to our channel. And thanks for watching.